So let's just go over the issues then. So we should probably sort this from oldest to newest.
We have one blocking. Let's start with that one. I missed it last week. Stefan mentioned it, and I didn't get that.
So this one you've got the partner?
Do that as priority.
Alrighty.
If you scroll to the bottom of the top post, there's an edited version.
Are we streaming or not, by the way?
No. Okay. I already said probably that we have audio issues.
Sorry, I meant like at the bottom of the very top post. Like I put a little addendum on.
Oh, sorry.
Oh.
Yeah. So we previously talked about this API, which is basically you have a stream that represents a connected WebSocket connection, and now you want to actually be able to use the WebSocket class to communicate over it to implement the protocol. And right now we're source sharing our managed WebSocket implementation between CoreFX and multiple assemblies in CoreFX, as well as ASP.NET. So ASP.NET, we build it into multiple assemblies, and ASP.NET has been copying and pasting the source into their own repo. The idea here is we just expose that protocol implementation as its own API, and we can use that API, so we don't have to build the source into multiple places, and ASP.NET can use that API, so they don't have to deal with all the code copy, which has become fairly complex. We previously agreed to this, and then the question was just where do we put it? And so after some discussion, the proposal is to basically create a new assembly. And I realize it's a little strange to have assembly with, one exposed method, but there's a lot of code behind that method. Having it in its own assembly will make it easier for us to just use that on NetFX as well. So we can either just build for Net Standard, or more than likely we'll want to cross compile and have a Net Core app implementation as well as a Net Standard implementation to take advantage of newer stuff. So the main thing to discuss is the assembly, the namespace, the class name, etc.
Let's see.
We currently have two assemblies: SystemNet WebSockets.dll, which contains the base WebSocket class, as well as some of the helper classes. And then we have a SystemNet WebSockets.client.dll, which contains client WebSocket and associated classes. So this assembly would sort of live between the two of them. It would depend on SystemNet WebSockets.dll, and it would be depended on by SystemNet WebSockets.client.dll, SystemNet HTTP Listener.dll, as well as ASP.NET's assembly.
Just so we're clear, I think the reason why you're putting it in its own assembly so it can be ooped, is that correct?
That's correct. Otherwise, we could just put it in SystemNet WebSocket.dll.
So don't we have actually right now the problems with that we moved some stuff to the platform and it's kind of breaking for 2.1 and that stuff? So this is going to be in the same category, right?
Well,
Sorry, what was it?
Its own assembly at least.
Will there be any CoreFX dependencies on this, Stephen?
Yep, he mentioned.
Yeah, but
Yes. Yeah, well, SystemNet WebSockets client would depend on this.
would be in the shared framework.
I mean, unless we gave up on that and continued building the same source into multiple places, but I was hoping we could get away from that.
So how can we oop this if the shared framework ends up depending on it?
We can oop it still. We just won't have an asset for Net Core app. It'll just be in the shared framework.
Oh, you could oop it on desktop, you're saying?
Yes.
I see.
I mean, if we have a way of putting this into SystemNet WebSockets.dll and still oobing it, I'm fine with that too.
So I think that, I had some discussions with both Karel and Imo last week about this whole issue of oobing and stuff like this. I think at the API review meeting, we should just discuss the APIs and then have this meeting in an hour to talk about oobing and use it as yet another example, because otherwise,
You're gonna red hole over here.
Exactly. We basically
We already approved the API. Was this a question, only open question, was whether or not we open it in its own assembly or not? So we can skip this for now.
I think that seems like I would say in general, I would agree with Bess. the point of the API review is both to decide the API and where it ships. I think for now I would just say let's just skip the discussion of where the ships, like where we put it, because there's meta discussion.
Yeah, in general I agree that API review will discuss where it ships.
Yeah.
It's just this hooking thing is so special and so Toscani, right, that we need to have it.
That's fine. Can we at least decide on the class name? Part of the OOB discussion was if we put it into an existing assembly, we could theoretically put it onto an existing class.
Right.
But if we want it usable on desktop as well, it has to go into its own class, so we need to come up with a class name.
So I think, like, if it wouldn't be OOBed, I think the type would probably be WebSocket, right? Because it's effectively a factory method, right?
Well, but that class already exists.
That's what I'm saying. So if we wouldn't OOB it,
You put this on WebSocket.
then we would put it on WebSocket. Is that fair?
Yep.
So okay, so that would say that then our answer would be basically twofold. If you don't OOB it, put it on WebSocket. If we OOB it, are we happy with this type? And I would say, like, I don't see any problem
So
with
why
that.
is it called protocol? Why not something like WebSocket, factory, let's say?
Because the idea was this doesn't just create WebSockets out of thin air. It gets an existing connection and provides the WebSocket protocol on top of it. That said, I'm not strongly connected to the name in any
I'm
fashion.
not proposing that we call it factory. I don't like the factory suffix. I was just asking, why is it called protocol?
Yeah, just the reason was because it's basically layering the protocol on top of the existing connection that's already there. At least that was my reasoning. I didn't have a better name.
Like if we talk about OOBing components, I think the problem with OOBing is we have to find a home for the type, right? And like if we decide we want to OOB technology, I think we should probably settle on a type name that is effectively creating a logical island without overpromising. So if we make this type name super generic, like WebSocket Factory or something, well, let's say we OOB this particular thing, which is the protocol wrapper. And later on, we have to un-OOB the protocol wrapper and put it in box. And then we have to create another type, let's say, for some other web factory stuff. Well, if the name is very generic, then that name is like, it no longer makes any sense at that point. That's why I think it's better to settle on a name that is
More specific.
Yeah, somewhat thematic at least. I wouldn't say specific, but like,
So could it be an extension method on WebSocket to basically like augment,
rather than create? Yeah, maybe.
like a wrap API? There are many of these APIs. Like they take an instance and you call wrap in protocol.
Well, great.
But at this point, you don't have a WebSocket. So for us with client WebSocket, we create a stream. We do the whole HTTP stuff. We get a stream, and then we need to put that into a WebSocket so you can use the WebSocket API. Similarly, ASP.NET, they upgrade their connection to be a WebSocket. They have a stream that represents it, and then they need to get a WebSocket object around that. So generally, you don't have one already.
I see. Because I'm trying to, find out a way for this API to kind of look natural if you squint. Where it's like, it's in a separate assembly because it just adds additional things to the core function.
If we had static extensions, it would make sense to be an extension on the WebSocket class.
Would it make sense to make it an extension on stream? No, because it needs to be a specific stream, right?
Yeah, it needs to. Well, yeah, I mean, a bidirectional connection to something. I mean, it's almost always going to be over some kind of network connection, but the actual stream that represented that network connection, it might be a network stream, it might be an SSL stream, it might be whatever stream type ASP.NET uses.
Yeah, I wouldn't make it an extension of stream. That would feel very weird.
So also like the name create from connected stream. So the call site will read WebSocket protocol create from connected stream, and then it doesn't return WebSocket protocol, it returns WebSocket. So that's
Kind of weird.
Yeah, I mean,
so maybe the method. What if the method was called create socket from stream?
works for me. I mean, I don't think the connected adds much.
Yeah, and also it wouldn't imply that it creates a protocol, because now it kind of, the whole call site will imply that it creates WebSocket protocol.
Well, it doesn't even have to be a network stream. I mean, in theory, I could record network traffic stored in a file and replay, right?
I mean, at that point, you could just say create WebSocket. You wouldn't even need the from part, right?
Or just create.
Well, I sort of agree with Christoph. If you just say, if you're concerned about the name of the type matching the return.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, given that the overload seems very specific already, like even if we have to add new flavors to that, it seems logical that there are overloads to this one. Right? So I think having a generic name.
There are other alternatives. I mean, we could, without a ton of good reason, we could expose a derived WebSocket class like managed WebSocket or something, and then it could just be managed WebSocket.create, and that would return a managed WebSocket. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, to me they almost sound like the same thing. I don't.
Yeah, the only thing I would buy you is having the class be the same thing that's returned from the create method.
You know, like if the method was called create socket from stream, it would be clear that it creates socket, not protocol.
Create WebSocket, you mean?
It could be WebSocket, yeah, sure. Socket is just a mental simplification, but fine, WebSocket would be good.
Yeah, it's just we already have something called socket that's very different.
Alright, so then let me just copy this guy here. Let's go all the way to the end. Make this C#, paste that guy in, and say, if we don't, we should use WebSocket. And then we say create. What did we say? Create WebSocket from stream.
Yeah, let's keep connected.
Yeah,
just
connected is okay. Is the from stream even adding anything? I mean, you pass in the stream, so it's kind of obvious.
But I think this is basically the difference. If you just want to create WebSocket, you use APIs on WebSocket. But if you want to create it from an existing stream.
Well, WebSocket is an abstract class that doesn't provide any. Well, it has a factory method that is obsolete and hidden.
I see. But it's not a generic wraparound the stream, right? Like it's or is it? It's really for protocols, right?
It is an implementation of the WebSocket protocol on top of the stream that you're given.
And the stream has to be basically both read-write, correct? Has to can read and can write have to return true.
Correct. Yeah, that was sort of what I was trying to get at with the connected part. It's like it's not just an arbitrary stream. This isn't actually doing this isn't doing the WebSocket handshake to do the upgrade from HTTP to WebSocket. That's already been done.
Right. And
now you just want to layer the protocol stuff on top of this already connected read-write stream.
I think it's good. The stream adds to the method name. It basically says, I don't create it out of the blue and we create streams for you. You have an existing stream and we just wrap it in a protocol.
So, in case we don't want to OOB it, or cannot, whatever, and we put it on WebSocket, would we keep the method name like this?
You'd probably get rid of the WebSocket in the name, I assume.
Yeah, create from stream. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And it's array segment, not something more more modern like buffer or memory, because it has to be on desktop, or are those not interchangeable? I'm not an expert.
Yeah, we could make it memory of byte. That's reasonable. This was opened a while ago.
Is that available on desktop?
Yes.
Is there any reason to
Memory
prefer
applied.
array segment?
It's only available on desktop. But yes.
Well,
This one is OOP too.
Yeah, I mean,
So if it's OOP, then
yeah, I don't have preferences. I don't know.
I don't know of any reason why memory would be a downside. Christoph, can you think of anything?
no.
are there any contexts in which I'd want to use array segment where I wasn't forced to?
I mean, the only downside that I can see is people understand how array segment works, and memory is kind of new. So if we are targeting the API at kind of the average LOB developer,
Do we expect people to even use this parameter? It's optional.
Also, is memory extractor a class?
sure.
Okay, so then it still needs to be valuable with now.
Yeah, I mean, so there's a public API for creating the client WebSocket that takes an array segment, but given an array segment, you can always create a memory from it cheaply. So that would seem to be the more generic thing.
We're trying to get away from array segments, right? We already in the past stopped some APIs with array segments to wait on span and memory. So
Also, array
that's
segment
kind of
is
insane.
yeah. Also, memories. I mean, array segment is kind of a weird type because it has the full array, and you don't know whether the API will actually use the section of the array that is excluded.
Oh, I see.
Like,
you can access the rest.
yeah, you can actually access the whole array, despite the fact that you pass in just the segment. Yeah.
Yeah. array segment dot array. Yeah. Encapsulation seeds memory. Huh? Unless there's a lot of other WebSocket API that include array segment.
And
I
memory.
mean, there is, but we're also adding overloads that work with span and memory. So
Also, memory allows you to use native memory, and array segment doesn't. Which may be interesting for the buffering case. What do you think, Steve?
yeah, I think maybe, although I think it's probably more interesting to use own memory from ASP.NET's perspective. I don't know exactly how they're going to be using it, but since they already do all that, own memory pooling stuff, maybe they'd want to pass those in.
Yeah. Okay.
So the receive buffer size and send buffer size, how they are related to buffer if I don't pass null?
So if you pass null, we just use those hints.
Yep.
If you don't pass null, we'll try and use the memory provided. Otherwise, we'd fall back to the hints. I mean, they really are hints.
Oh, those are hints in case I don't supply the buffer. Okay, fair enough.
Or if it's not big enough.
Or what?
Or if it's not big enough. I mean, the alternative is we could say you're required to pass in a buffer, or if not, like we just do whatever we want. The reason I included those is client WebSocket exposes options for it, but we could, of course, just translate those options into we can just do whatever we want with regards to allocation. Like we could take the hints provided to client WebSocket options and just allocate a buffer that's passed in. So we wouldn't lose anything by just saying, get rid of the sizes and just have the buffer. And if you want to control it, you pass one in. If you don't, the implementation does what it wants. In fact, that might even be better. And then if in the future we actually wanted to allow the sizes to be passed, we could always add an overload. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, much more like, I would be curious, like, what's needed. Like, if ASP.NET thinks that they need the buffer sizes, like, sure, let's do it. Or the hints.
Yeah, I was going to say, let's remove them, but with the caveat that we talk to, like, Andrew, and if he says they're important, we can add them back. Otherwise, we just go with the buffer.
Sounds good to me.
I mean, it's the only concern that the overload is more complicated because you can also just default them, right, to -1 or something.
I think it's weird. It's not only that they are, because you passing a buffer, it already has a size, and it's like, why do I need to again pass some sizes? I already gave you a buffer, and you can read the size by saying memory.length.
It's not quite intuitive like that. Like,
Sure, but these are different buffers, right? I mean, this is the buffer that they use as a scratch buffer, I suppose, right? If this is the one that they actually use for receiving and sending.
Well, it says they can use it however they want, for example, for receive and send.
Sure, but like, to me,
don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that, like, maybe they don't. I'm saying, like, when you look at the APIs and the description, it's not super clear how the sizes and the memory buffer size relate.
They're going to pass in the buffer and the size. And it'll be wrong because that's not the size of that buffer.
Yeah, I suppose. Like, I don't.
Let's go without the sizes for now, and if it's important to put them back, I will. Also, for the buffer, we should remove the question mark, right, Christoph? Like, there's no reason to ever have a nullable memory.
Oh, because
just
what would you pass if you don't want to provide a buffer?
It doesn't have a null pointer implementation. Like,
well, it has you can pass an empty memory. There's no null.
But isn't that effectively what a null pointer ends up being in that?
It would be like a sentinel value. Like if you pass a buffer with length 0, it means I don't pass a buffer.
No, but is that empty or is it literally like a memory that points to nothing?
It's both. It has the length field is 0 and the pointer points to null.
Most people are just going to miss the parameter off, right?
But it's different from empty. I would say empty is you have a valid pointer with a length of 0.
There's no such thing. Well, you could, but if you basically say memory of byte.empty, you're gonna get an instance where the length is 0.
Is that like a single?
Yeah.
So there's static.empty.
Array empty.
That sounds actually okay.
Why would you do that if you can just miss the parameter off? Am I missing some distinction?
Parameter off by just making it. We could still make it to have a default value of default memory of byte, and it just wouldn't be off.
So just change null to memory.empty or whatever.
It wouldn't be question mark.
Exactly. And buffer, I find that a confusing name. Like, if it's really a scratch pad, can we call it scratch or something? Like, to me, that looks like it kind of important to give it a buffer if it needs one.
You can call it scratch. I mean, it is scratch memory.
Option scratch, something like that.
So back to the sizes, the hints. So are we going to allocate some buffers for the receiving and for the sending anyway?
If the supplied buffer is insufficient, yes.
I see. So we're gonna try to reuse this buffer, and if we need something bigger, we are allowed to allocate.
Right.
And this, I'm not familiar with the existing APIs. This sub.
Sorry, come again, Steve?
We try and use the pool if possible.
Okay. Sorry, Dan.
Oh, is default of memory.empty?
Yeah, because it's gonna basically, as I said, the length is gonna be 0 and the pointers are gonna be null.
Okay, and then I don't think this came up. Subprotocol, that's a well-known and required parameter for WebSocket construction.
Why is it subprotocol, not protocol?
It's actually called subprotocol.
And that's required, and it's
okay.
Yeah, it's part of the handshake, and you need to tell the WebSocket like what subprotocols were agreed upon.
And it should be lowercase p.
I was thinking about the same thing. Probably yes.
If OK has a lowercase k, we've really got a.
Is it a word?
Sub is not.
So.
Word, so I would say
it's
okay. According to the people that own that shit. I mean, I suppose that's the IETF.
Yeah, it is lowercase.
So then there's lowercase. I still think these are two words, but hey.
Probably call keep alive integral lowercase though as well.
I mean, it's a little strange. We're inconsistent because like there is a subprotocol property on WebSocket with a capital S and a capital P. So from that perspective, we would expect this to be lowercase s, capital P. But I think in the actual WebSocket RFC, I think it uses lowercase p.
It is. We just pulled it out.
Okay.
I would say that whatever we use in our APIs is overruling, in my opinion, because it should at least be self-consistent. I mean, we already use protocol with a capital P, and that's to be. Anything else before we bike ship this API to eternity?
You never want to press
the oop part.
Right. That one.
Market approved.
That's done. Yeah. Well.
Yeah.
Yeah, we should probably mark it.
We're averaging about 1.5 approvals per meeting.
Leave the blocking partner still on it and say we still need to decide on moving. Here. Good job, you approved one API in half an hour. Good job.
Can we do add copy to async overload with that buffer size?
Sorry, say again, this one?
No, down, 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 down,
not that one?
down, up, up. There.
Yes.
Just because I've been asked about it.
Similar-ish.
Well,
Oh no, actually no, that's the one that, yeah.
I don't have context on this. So. Oh, this is easy. It's just a missed overload.
Well, it's a question of, I mean, I have no problems with it. It's just a question of, we've sort of historically done you add a parameter, you add another overload that it takes it, and this is asking for like an overload that omits the middle parameter, basically.
Which is okay if it's likely that you want to pass one and not the other, right? I mean,
well, I mean, the problem is, I think you probably need to add. We need to basically add the one that adds the cancellation token back. I mean, cancellation tokens are kind of special because you always want to keep them last. So that kind of makes it shitty because you always end up, like, if you want to change the actual arguments of the method, you always end up inserting in the middle somewhere. I don't know how to do it.
So why cancellation tokens always last?
Because that's how we did it in the rest of the framework.
Because all the other overloads already existed, and adding it to the end.
When we added cancellation token, it was always last. I mean, that's kind of like the guideline.
It's the least interesting thing for all that.
Well,
But that sort of doesn't matter for this discussion. Like the first two overloads were already, basically there. Well, we're just talking about adding one that takes destination and cancellation token, right? It's the one that's missing, basically.
I don't think anyone would say when you add cancellation tokens, you go double all the number of overloads you've got.
No, that's why I think
it's reasonable where there's the common case, which is you're passing a stream and a token, like 8192 overload.
I would always argue that the right way of doing it is just marking this thing as optional and be done with it.
How would I pass a stream and a cancellation token only?
Without buffer size.
Sure, we could make buffer size optional as well. And then you can make any combinations wherever you want.
Remind me how optional parameters work in the middle. I know that's possible now.
So the way we version optional parameters is the idea is if you ever have to add one, you create a new overload that has the one in. Right. Everything on the new overload is optional like the old one and plus the new one. Right. And then the old one you mark everything as non-optional.
But I can't remember the syntax. Is it comma, or do you have to put the name equals?
So when you want to pass a destination
with no buffer size,
with no buffer size, a cancellation token, you have to say cancellation token equals blah.
I see. So there's no comma. You can't do that syntax.
I don't think you can do comma.
Okay.
You mean cancellation token colon?
Yeah.
Blah.
So if you were to make the last two arguments optional, for buffer size, you need to decide what you want the default value to be. And you basically have two options. You either make it a sentinel like -1, in which case we have to make -1 a legal value to pass in, or you make it the actual size you want it to be, in which case you bake that into the signature.
Yep. Well, we kind of have the problem today. Like, logically, we always said, like, when you have these overloads, like, logically what you do here is, like, those ones were usually always default. I mean, like, if you pass in 0, probably it always does the right thing, I suppose.
Or froze. I think the difference is that right now, since there's no default, each stream can choose whatever they want the default to be. The moment you default it to some number, it's fixed.
You baked it into the reference assembly.
Well, unless you do what Steven said, right? You could still have sentinel values in implementation.
Well, but then sentinel value has
implementation and sentinel.
Yeah, they need to be able to adjust.
So the question is, our implementation today already handling sentinels. I mean, it's possible they do, it's possible they don't.
Yeah.
But now I think about it though. We add this, of course, it's going to be virtual, not abstract. So we could make it turn around and call the copy to async there, and everything would work fine.
So the problem with virtuals and optionality is that, so if we mark this thing as optional, it only helps people that literally call this method. Like if you have a derived type, and you have the local variable type as the derived type, I don't think the optionality actually kicks in, because if that stream happens to override it, and the override doesn't make this thing optional, like I think your call side doesn't compile anymore.
Also, Dan, were you saying we would add the new if we were to add a new overload, we would add it as virtual?
Isn't that correct?
I wouldn't think so.
We just call the existing.
Scroll down. Scroll down. It's nice. We have the proposal there. It's in the wrong order.
Ah, I see. And what would the implementation of that look like?
It would call copy to async with the whatever buffer size we choose.
So is 81920 already baked into the base stream?
It's baked into the implementation of copy to async on the base stream.
Oh, okay, there you are.
But it's not baked into the signature. It's baked into the implementation.
Yeah, it makes sense to me to do it that way, I think. I feel like we're trying too hard to make parameters optional.
No, I think I would agree with you. I think the only downside of doing it like this is like it has this. And the question is now, what happens if I want to pass in? What was the other one we wanted to do? Oh yeah, no, that one is actually the one that has the least. This one would allow us to have destination only, destination and buffer size, and destination and cancellation token. So this is all permutations we can have.
Yep.
If we add one more, well then you have to add some overloads.
And then you can play with the optional thingies.
Yeah, which I think the problem with optionality is that we should probably revisit that discussion. No, like the version we have solved. I think the problem that we haven't thought about is what happens on virtual methods. Because as I said, like if we mark this thing as optional, like it will not carry through derived types unless they also mark their stuff.
Because the compiler basically puts the value in for you.
Yes, and the compiler will look at the definition of the thing that is visible at the call side. So if the call side is like some type derived from stream, it will probably not look at the stream base.
So if it's optional, it needs to have default value, right?
Well, yeah, you have to have a default value, but for most part, like you can come up with one. Like it's not.
Yeah, that's fine.
That's really not. I mean, yeah.
Can we just approve? I mean, like another test is if this was created from scratch today, would we find that third one objectionable? No. So unless there's some issue in adding it later, which I don't think we found, we should just approve it and move on.
Yeah, I think so too.
I mean, I don't particularly care about this one, but I do want to get more than 1.5 done.
Any concerns? Otherwise, I would really agree with that. So what is that?
Okay, I'll ping the guy and he can go do it.
All right.
Did you post it?
I did, but like GitHub is. I thought I did. Right?
Because it was like grayed out the comments. So.
Yeah, that's good.
Cool.
All right. I just randomly opened that one. Any concerns with that one?
So stream and async on it. Let's get going, man.
Hey, we're in the mood.
Got all three.
Yeah, I know we're getting into. I think this one needs another overload now. Actually, this one already has the other one.
There's been more discussion on this. I think I don't remember where this ended up, but I don't think it ended up. At least from my perspective, it didn't end up in the same place as the original proposal.
Who marked API for review?
That was probably me.
Okay.
No, actually, yeah.
It would be good to kind of update the top proposal in such case. Or
you just approve the other one, but they are overloads, correct? They all need to make sense. It would be good to like holistically approve them or review them.
What do you mean?
We just talked about string copy to async, right?
Yep. Yes.
So these are overloads.
Yeah, I think they do though, right? If you look at this state here, you look at this one here. So this one basically doesn't.
Yeah, but let's not look at that. Let's scroll down to the bottom.
Okay. Which one is it? Oh, there's another one.
And now scroll up until there. So if there are more overloads we wanted to add that delegate to these, that's fine. But these would be like the most expanded.
So it's different from what he had. He had everything virtual, right? No, he had none of them virtual.
Well, also changing the delegate type, using array segment. So
that should be memory.
So was it intentional that his stuff wasn't virtual? I guess it was an oversight on his side, I suppose. So then.
So the key thing here is you're not passing in a stream, you're passing in a callback. So rather than the implementation basically behaves the same as the existing copy to async, except instead of calling write async on a target stream, it invokes a callback.
Sorry, read only span action is a delegate that that takes a span of t, I suppose, which in your case is byte, and then returns object. Is that all? Or it takes an object?
It takes an object too, I think.
Oh, it returns nothing because it's an action clearly. So I see. So the signature is a span of the first argument, comma the second argument.
Yeah, it's basically an action of span of byte, comma object.
Is it read-only span or is it
span?
Read-only span. Yeah.
And then the second one is effectively.
Now we'd actually probably want to make it swap the first two arguments of the func to make it match the same direction as the span overload.
So that seems reasonable because I just tried to blip this in my head and it works so well. So this one should accept essentially read-only buffer of byte.
Yeah, which has now been, since this was put up, it's now read-only memory, but yeah.
So my only question would be, should we consider adding strongly typed delegates types just so the signatures look somewhat sensible? Because it's a bit odd that one of this is a constructed generic and the other one is not. And I understand why that is, but like it seems like I think you want to convey that these are logically overloads, right? Which looking at the signatures is not that clear.
I just don't love the idea of introducing delegates that aren't related to span because there's some other overload that needs a custom delegate because it uses span.
Yeah. I don't know, like maybe my model is wrong. I still think of buffer and span as like peers, but I mean there's more stuff in there. There's also arrays, so we wouldn't add overload to take arrays, for example, right? But like, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, but it's just not worth it for buffer or memory because there's no problem. You can just use a regular one. So
yeah, I suppose that's fair. All right, so then.
Stupid question. Where's the read-only span action defined? I can't find it in the source code.
It's only a different branch.
It's in master.
Having said that, so one suggestion I would have for these APIs, they are so complicated and hard to understand what's going on. Can we like hide them somehow? Like especially the second overload. The first one I can wrap my head around. And it's probably only because I was on the email thread when we decided. The second one, I still like, I cannot wrap my head around it.
Should task go before consideration token? Probably, right?
What was the question?
Should task go before consideration token and the callback signature?
Oh, probably. Oh, no, it can't. No, because the last thing is what's returned, not an argument.
Oh, it's a func. Never mind. Yeah, I'm not quite there yet. All right. No, everything makes sense. All right. So to Christop's question, I think so I agree with you logically. Practically, I don't know what we would do because I mean, like we have the ability to hide APIs, yes, but like, what happens if you want to call the API?
You have to know and call it. It's
Yes,
so for example, like like one thing we could do is just apply editor browsable false to at least the second one.
Well, I mean, we could do the C# thing, the VB thing, right? Like mark the second API as advanced.
But the advanced feature doesn't work. So,
like as in
people switch to yes, I want to see advanced because I didn't see to advanced, and now they are advanced in the rest of when they reinstalled Visual Studio.
Sure. Like
maybe it's okay. It's just like seriously, it takes me some time to think what the second overload does. Peter just stopped by. Can you tell us what the second method does? Copy to async, func, read-only buffer of byte, object, cancellation token, task, object in buffer.
Holy crap. We should have a rule against nested.
We do have a rule against nested generics.
Do we?
Mm-hmm. It says do it carefully.
Oh, that's careful again. So it's a cancelable async task. You're giving a callback, okay?
What's object state?
Well, unless we say that basically copy to async in general, it's an advanced API, and like we don't expect people to go there unless, which probably is the case, correct? Like, most people don't need to use copy to async. Hey, most people don't need to call APIs on stream directly.
Okay, so it seems like we are where we are. Approved, ready for review.
Funk overload.
We're cruising. We've done 3.
Yes, and now we're out of time.
Is this API review?
Yeah, well, it's the triage of everything that's marked API ready for review, like the small things that are not like worthwhile spending an hour on.
Can we? So given that we are stealing the second hour for another discussion, can we schedule the Friday meeting? Because we have a backlog and we're not making much progress going through that lately.
So let's first quit this one. So I think like we're done with this thing, right?
Are we going all this to
Then we
this?
stop the recording on this one, and we can go on to the
Combo.